Thank you, Veronica, for that awesome introduction. The truth is, as you can tell, when Veronica asks something with her charm and good grace, it is impossible to refuse. So I was delighted to accept the invitation and am honored to be with you today for your first Latvian conference. So let me pull up some slides. So the theme of evaluation for better governance is one of the most important issues of our time, because we are finding increasingly around the world that as we face the challenges of what's called the polycrisis, the crises in environment, the pandemic, the pollution of oceans, land, and air, economic insecurities, the political and violent wars going on around the world. These are issues that ultimately require governance, local governance, national governments, international governance. And so you've chosen an extremely important topic, the connection between a knowledgeable citizenry and democracy and well-functioning governance are well documented. I'm going to review a little bit of where we are with governance criteria and evaluation, and then, as Veronica anticipated, talk some about what I think the Latvian perspective in particular can contribute to all of us. The Council of Europe in 2008 developed 12 principles of good governance. They identified these criteria as participation of people, respect for the rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, a consensus orientation, bringing people together, equity and inclusiveness, effectiveness and efficiency, accountability, strategic vision, sound financial management, human rights, and cultural diversity. And a part of the role that evaluation plays in society is articulating criteria, not just measuring whether or not they are followed and having people engage in accountability exercises, but the very articulation of criteria, determining what is good, in this case, what is good governance, is a contribution of evaluation. When we help hold forth before the citizenry, before parliamentarians, before policymakers and decision makers, the criteria, when those criteria are visible and taken seriously, that very engagement contributes to good governance and helps people dialogue about where they stand with regard to these criteria. There's been a number of books and writings about the role of evaluation with governance. This book from the World Bank by Ray Risk, Marie-Hélène Boilly, and Frederic Martin looked at building evaluation capacity to strengthen governance, looking at the relationship between a strong evaluation system and good governance, and looking at their interdependence. The OECD put out a publication on improving governance with policy evaluation. These, by the way, are available online for downloading free, with a number of case studies of the role of evaluation in supporting good governance. Why does policy evaluation for governance matter? Well, governments are facing increasingly complex economic, social, and environmental challenges. Together, these are called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, which require systemic approaches and systems thinking, to which we shall return. These challenges are compounded by increased citizen demand and higher expectations, fragmentation in knowledge, higher perception of corruption, skill gaps in the civil service, budgetary constraints, and an erosion of trust in public institutions. Lessons learned from the OECD experience also highlight that it's more difficult for governments to identify outcomes, trade-offs, as well as winners and losers of an implemented policy due to the increased complexity, divergent values, and interdependent processes and structures and actors that are related to major policy and governance challenges. Evidence-based governance is become the mantra of our times. Governance should demonstrate that decisions and policies are informed by evidence, that they set realistic expectations about various policy choices, and spend public resources adequately. Evaluating governance performance and results provides a deeper understanding of underlying problems, and evaluation-based governance can support making informed decisions about the feasibility of continuing a policy or initiating a new one. And so what these publications, what the writings on evaluation and governance suggest is that evaluation strengthens governance, and that governance engaging in evaluation strengthens governance and strengthens evaluation. A part of what I want to emphasize is the importance of what we call process use, so that historically evaluation has emphasized the use of findings, but especially in that context for what we're learning about evaluation and governance, the engagement in evaluation has important implications for the thinking process involved in governance, for having criteria that are attended to, for being explicit and transparent, and that these are what we call process use. That is, they are the effects of attending to evaluation that occur quite apart from, in addition to, the findings. So the evaluative thinking, when that is brought into governance, when evaluation thinking guides governance actions, the conceptualization of policies and the follow-through and learning from thinking about the criteria of good governance, that has effects on the governance process, both for policymakers and for the citizenry. And what this means is that one of the major transitions for evaluation over my 50 years as an evaluator is what I've called moving from the back end to the front end. When we began evaluation 50 years ago, we thought it was going to be a back end activity, by which I mean looking at what comes out of programs and policies, basically measuring goal attainment. But when we went out to do that, we found that policies and programs often had muddy goals, conflicting goals, difficult to measure goals, and that they often didn't have very coherent policies or programs or projects. And so we moved from the back end to the front end, meaning we got involved in helping clarify goals. We got involved in logic models and theories of change and performance measurement. And that meant that we begin to have impacts on programs and policies in helping conceptualize them and make them evaluable, quite apart from the data gathered about them. And so this gave rise to what we call evaluability assessment. Is a policy or program ready for evaluation? Is it clear what the policy or program is aiming at accomplishing and how it's going to accomplish that? And this puts us then into the policy process as helping on the conceptual side, moving from the back end to the front end, where we are nurturing policies, helping design them, and helping to increase their viability. So we do findings use, the results that come from our evaluations, but we also do process use, learning from thinking evaluatively and being engaged in the conceptual process. There's a famous Sufi story that captures this difference. It's the story of the character in Sufi stories, Mullah Nasruddin, the wise fool, who is known to be getting rich from smuggling. And every time he crossed the border guards searched him and his donkeys, but they could never find what he was smuggling. Mullah Nasruddin went to a bar one time, and there was a retired border guard who said to him, Mullah Nasruddin, let me buy you dinner, let me buy you drinks, and then tell me what you were smuggling. I promise not to tell anyone, but help an old man sleep better at night. Tell me at last what you were smuggling. So they had dinner, They had some refreshments, they had drinks, and then the border guard said, so Nasruddin, how were you smuggling? What were you smuggling that was making you so wealthy? And Nasruddin said, donkeys. So we use this story to say, in evaluation, we're often primarily looking at findings, but the process of thinking evaluatively is a major impact. And that's what we've learned in our studies of use. It's both the process of engagement, helping clarify criteria and goals, as well as the findings that come from applying those criteria, that becomes part of infusing evaluative thinking into the policy and governance process. In this cartoon, the border guard is asking, do you have anything to declare? And the jester representing the evaluator says, yes, evaluation is a way of thinking. And his donkey says they're only looking for findings. And so this is a major contribution of evaluation in enhancing governance to infuse the attention to criteria of good governance and helping to articulate what constitutes well-conceived policies, both in their formulation and in their implementation. Evaluation use then involves connections between evidence and policymakers, but these remain often elusive. The use of evaluation for governance continues to be challenging. Underuse of evaluations may jeopardize the legitimacy of the evaluation exercise in the first place. Unused evaluations may also contribute to an impression of excess supply, whereby quality evidence gets lost in the shuffle. Underuse also represents a waste of public resources. Policy evaluations, whether conducted internally or contracted out to external stakeholders, require significant public, human, and financial resources, which will be wasted if evaluations are not used. And so we have a responsibility, given our commitment to use, to engage with policymakers and program implementers, decision makers, in ways that help them value what evaluation has to contribute, to be active in promoting evaluation use. That's what I've spent my 50-year career doing. The 5th edition of utilization-focused evaluation came out last year, and the basic overarching principle of that is to focus on intended use by and with intended users in every aspect of and in every stage of an evaluation, to build relationships. This isn't just a data and measurement and methods business. Evaluation is a people business. It involves working with people to help them value and come to understand what's going on. In this cartoon, the director is saying, so you're our evaluator. I suppose you're here to measure if we are meeting our goals. And the evaluator says, let me ask you this. What don't you know that if you did know would make a difference to what you do? To figure out what information is helpful and useful, not just to treat evaluation as a compliance activity. We conducted research with social innovators on their perceptions of evaluation using photo voice, where you show them a set of photographs of people meeting of a sports event, of a high-rise apartment being built, of roadkill, of a forest fire, of people in conflict, 15 different photographs, and ask them which photograph most represented their experience of evaluation. And this was overwhelmingly the photograph they picked. That evaluation was burdensome, it weighed them down, it was cumbersome, it made them unsteady. The second most common picture was this, that evaluation is just a paperwork exercise. It's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of reporting, it's a lot of compliance activity. And so to make evaluation useful, we have to reposition it and conduct it in ways that both the process of engagement and the findings are useful. And that's on us. It's not on the people that we work with. We have to find ways to make evaluation relevant and meaningful to them. Eleanor Chulimsky, one of our founders in evaluation, who headed the governance unit in the Government Accountability Office in the United States, introduced what she called and her staff called prospective evaluation methods and the prospective evaluation synthesis. This report is available online. but it's a report on how evaluators can help formulate policy, not just evaluate policy. Eleanor came to realize with the American Congress that as new policies were being considered, evaluators could access a knowledge base about what had been learned from past programs and projects and policies that would inform new policies, making evaluators relevant on the front end side on helping design evaluations and design the policies themselves and connect evaluation design with policy design to have them interconnected together. And that's called prospective evaluation, looking ahead. More and more, we're hearing concerns about foresight, about futuring, about being strategic. And evaluation plays a role in that by bringing evaluative thinking onto the front end. And this means developing and validating contextually appropriate and accepted criteria for good governance. So when we return to the overall utilization-focused principles, it means to contextualize, understand, and take into account the situation in which the evaluation will occur, to strategize process use, facilitate process use with intentionality, to be aware of and strategic about how being involved in the evaluation affects everything right from the beginning, the conceptualization of policies and programs, as well as improving implementation, learning along the way, and providing accountability information for judgment. Adapting, watching for, being alert to, and adapt to changed circumstances, shifting priorities, turnover among intended users, reallocation of resources, changing timelines, and other factors. The pandemic really emphasized the importance of evaluation for adaptation and learning, for helping people shift in the face of changing issues. And climate change and the poly crisis is going to increase our need to help adaptation and learning. And that means being able to reflect and learn, to spend time doing it, to be able to not make it just about writing reports, but to really engage people around reflection and learning, making time and space to reflect on the strengths and weaknesses of the process and results together, as you do when you have a meeting like this, that evaluators come together and learn together. So let me suggest some ways to contextualize in the Latvian context. Context involves understanding that evaluation is different in diverse contexts, with diverse people, with diverse perspectives, with diverse processes, with diverse outcomes. And a major movement worldwide these days is to take generic evaluation principles, general principles, and adapt them to the local context, so that it raises a question of the 12 principles of good governance. What do these criteria mean for Latvia? And what other criteria, if any, are relevant and important? How do these get translated and used in a Latvian context? Contextualizing worldwide means looking for how evaluation is meaningful in different contexts. I've worked in Burkina Faso in Africa, and we used one of the African proverbs there to help them connect with evaluation. If the stream zigzags, the crocodile has to zigzag. And that was a well understood proverb in the African context that we connected evaluation to. Paulo Freire, one of the great intellectuals of Brazil, talked about integrating thinking and emotion. And working in Brazil, we used that admonition from the well-respected Paulo Freire. In Japan, we drew upon the philosopher Okari Kazuku, who said the art of life is constant readjustment to our surroundings, and that evaluation and thinking helps do that. We looked at language, particular in Japanese, that was relevant to evaluation, like the word kazin, which is a Japanese word that means the quest for continuous improvement. And we tied our evaluation work to the concept of kazin in Japan. So Latvian proverbs for evaluation that I think are intriguing as I've learned about the culture and history of Latvia. The man promises, the man executes. This is a large issue in evaluation, is part of what we do is look at whether or not there is follow through from promises and hopes. On the hook of truth, only small carp will bite. In the net of falsehood, the big salmon are caught. I found that to be a very intriguing proverb. Hear much, talk a little. Our role in data gathering is to listen, is to collect stories, is to hear different perspectives and be able to understand and look at the patterns. And the one that I found most intriguing, thanks to Christian, was even an old mushroom has its value. I've learned in preparing for this and talking to Veronica and Christian that Latvia is very much involved in the mushrooms, mushroom hunting. And this provides a wonderful metaphor for evaluation inquiry. Let me make the connection with my home state of Minnesota, where I'm coming to you from. In Minnesota, it's where the last glacier melted. We have over 10,000 lakes. The Mississippi River, which runs all the way through the United States, a number of rivers and streams and lakes, and 87% of the population goes fishing at least once a year. And so when I do evaluation in Minnesota, I talk about fishing. And we have the proverb, give someone a fish they eat for a day, teach them the fish they eat for a lifetime. And so connecting evaluation to fishing, I tell them that everything in evaluation is in fishing. What constitutes a good day fishing? How many fish you caught, what kind of fish you caught, who you're fishing with, whether you're fishing for recreation or for food, and that the criteria for good fishing is a way to teach people what is involved in evaluative thinking. But now, given the environmental crisis, the poly crisis, when I talk in Minnesota about fishing, I also talk about the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem, the more severe weather, the pollution of our waters, the mercury that's getting into fish, the way in which rising temperatures of the lakes will affect wildlife, invasive species, the inequities involved in who has access to good fishing places, the inequalities in access. And so fishing becomes a way in a Minnesota context for me to help people connect with evaluation and with evaluation system thinking. The mushroom provides a way of doing that in Latvia, it seems to me, because mushrooms are critical to the ecosystem, and that mushrooms draw our attention to the complexities and dynamics of the ecosystem. Fungi illuminate the nature of networks, responsive action, and efficient communications. I've been reading a wonderful book by Merlin Shedrake, a biologist who studies fungi, studies mushrooms, called Entangled Life. And it's about the ways in which fungi themselves constitute networks and have lessons to learn about how to bring systems thinking to bear. Let me read you just a bit of the introduction to that book, where he talks about how fungi are critical to our lives. Fungi, mushrooms are everywhere, but they are easy to miss. They are inside you and around you. They sustain you and all that you depend on. Fungi are changing the way that life happens, as they have done for more than 1 billion years. They are eating rock, making soil, digesting pollutants, nourishing and killing plants, surviving in space, inducing visions, producing food, making medicines, manipulating animal behavior, and influencing the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. Fungi provide a key to understanding the planet on which we live and the ways that we think, feel, and behave. Yet they live their lives largely hidden from view, and over 90% of their species remain undocumented. The more we learn about fungi, the more we learn about ourselves. And so mushroom ecosystems are a way to help people begin to think about systems more generally. And that's the leading edge of evaluation. Veronica and our members in the International Evaluation Academy are very much committed to bringing systems thinking more deeply into evaluation. And mushrooms and fungi are a way of understanding the interdependence of elements. Systems concepts involve looking at interrelationships, different kind of perspective, different kinds of mushrooms that involve different criteria, those that you can eat, those that you can't eat, mushrooms that have different characteristics for cooking and food, and the boundaries around where mushrooms are able to grow and how we engage in hunting for them. There's a major set of principles for the effective use of systems thinking and evaluation that's available online from the American Evaluation Association Systems Topical Interest Group that helps make these connections. And I think that the work on the interest in mushrooms in Latvia may well be one way to talk about how ecosystems and our interdependent networks are affecting both nature and humans. Another resource in this regard is a publication called The Water of Systems Change that looks at 6 elements for systems that relate to governance. At the top are what are the policies, practices, and resource flows in a governance system. In the middle are relationships and connections and power dynamics. And at the fulcrum of this are mental models. How do people think about governance? How do they think about policies, practices, and resource flows? What are the narratives? What are the stories that connect people? And having metaphors becomes a part of that. I've long used the metaphors of round lakes and fishing and water and this Chinese proverb. A wise person adapts to circumstances as water shapes itself to the vessel that contains it. Let me close with another metaphor that I found intriguing and have learned from as I've learned about Latvia. For a long time, we have used in looking at the relationship between evaluators and stakeholders and policymakers, the metaphor of the dance. And in my presentations last week at the American Evaluation Association, I used a metaphor of a dance to talk about the relationships between stakeholders and evaluators, and brought forth a famous dance from the 1930s. Now, I think about dance as a much more engaging process, and found that the most intriguing and powerful metaphor for dance comes from the Latvian festival. And the lessons in governance and evaluation and relationships and networks and systems to have more than 17,000 people dance together and the meaningfulness of that. And so that, in the power of story, is my new metaphor for how evaluation can engage people in systems. The Dance Festival of Latvia will be my go-to example for how we can think about how humans can come together to make a difference. Thank you. I'd be happy to engage with questions or comments.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael, very much. We have, I think, one question up to now. Let me. Yeah, do you see it?
In the chat? Yes.
Yep.
From your experience, what is the first thing we should do to implement the evaluative thinking approach? What is the low-hanging fruit? It is helping people realize that they're already engaged in evaluation. Evaluation is a part of how we've evolved. It's built into our thinking process. Michael Scriven, one of our great pioneers who we lost in August, was fond of beginning his presentations by saying that, asking, when did evaluation begin? And he would say it began 2.5 million years ago when human beings evolved. And it's a part of what we've become. And so helping people realize that what we do as a profession in evaluation is help enhance evaluative thinking that is natural to human beings, to make it more systematic. And that's the reason I was suggesting the mushroom metaphor, the festival dancing metaphor, but putting people in touch with things like when they make a purchase, a buying, a consumer decision, they're involved in evaluation. When they decide where to live, when they decide who to live with, when they decide how to parent their children. These are all evaluation activities. And so I find it's helpful to connect people with their lived experience of being involved in gathering data about things, what computer should I purchase, that these help them realize then that what we can offer is a systematic thinking approach to policies and programs based upon our fundamental human capacity to think evaluatively. And so the low-hanging fruit is beginning with that connection, and then looking for more immediate kinds of questions, not just what are the impacts of a policy over 2 or 3 years, but helping people get feedback quickly in the short term. How are people understanding a policy? How's it beginning? How's it implementing? Look for rapid feedback issues that begin to show the value of evaluation right from the beginning.
Okay, there are some other question as well. Some mushrooms are poisonous. What to do about those?
Well, some policies are poisonous. That's the point. How do we tell the difference? How do you identify the good mushrooms from the bad mushrooms? How do you identify the good policies from the bad policies? The programs that help people from the programs that make things worse? And so that metaphor about how do we know the difference, there are criteria for determining good mushrooms from bad mushrooms. What we help do is determine good policies from bad policies, and that requires criteria. And so again, the metaphor helps us communicate that we need criteria, we need evidence about what works, and we need to understand the implications of the policies and follow through to find out which ones are good, which ones are bad, not just bad in the short run, but bad for the climate, bad for the culture and society, that reduce equity, that create tensions and conflicts in society. So poisonous policies is, I think, a reasonable metaphor for why we need to be able to distinguish what's good from what's bad and have people think about that. In the same way that you have to be able to tell which mushrooms are appropriate for what kind of food, and which ones you can eat and which ones you can't.
We go saying as well that some mushrooms you can eat only once.
Right.
But okay, the next question, what could be the first steps to change the perception of evaluation as a burdensome activity?
It's a great question and an important one. And again, I think it comes from looking for ways to demonstrate the value of evaluation in learning and in action, and reducing some of the burdens of evaluation. Increasingly, doing long reports is not useful. In a rapidly turnaround world, in a world of ongoing data collection, that rapid feedback is more useful than writing lengthy reports. And so, or having people do a lot of paperwork. figuring out what is essential to know. There's a proverb that said, less is more. What is essential? What is critical? And not make evaluation about paperwork, but make it about what information is critical and how can we get that quickly, help people act and adjust and adapt to what's happening. That is the way that we help people perceive that it's not a burden, but it is an asset. It's a strength. It's something they can learn from and use for improving their programs and actions. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on your conference. And I wish you good mushroom hunting.
And now we'll probably start to think on the 100, and I don't know which evaluation approach, which is fungus-based approach. Yeah, very Latvian.
Oh yes, that's the one that will come from Latvia. So the next time I update the video, I will look for the Latvian mushroom approach to evaluation. Okay. The book actually describes some intriguing experiments they're doing, where they're placing in a ecosystem where they want to have communications and understand how the ecosystem works. They're placing fungi in different places in a simulation of that ecosystem and watch how they spread and connect together. And it turns out that they will find the most efficient way to create relationships and connections as the fungi connect with each other. They don't yet know how they communicate, but it's clear that they are very strong network connectors, and that has huge implications for how we connect with nature and with each other. And they're studying mushrooms to figure out how we can better communicate both with nature and with each other. So the Latvian mushroom approach to evaluation will help us all perhaps survive the poly crisis. We'll look forward to that.
And we will do that singing and dancing.
That's right. Everybody dance with the mushrooms and eat together. That will take it to the next level.
Thank you very much once more, Michael.
Have a good day. Thank you.